Creative Babble.
LaDonna, can you hear me? Oh, wait. I can't hear you all of a sudden.
Can you hear me now?
My conversation with LaDonna Humphrey started off with a little bit of tech problems, but we eventually figured it out. Hey, it's so nice to meet you. We have so many friends in common. I can't believe it's taken us this long to actually get to know one another.
Well, I'm excited to meet you. When I got your text this morning, I sent it to Jason and I said, "Is this real?"
Oh, it's real. Very real. When I reached out to LaDonna Humphrey, she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she contacted our mutual friend Jason to make sure that it was really me contacting her.
I'm excited to meet you. I am a big fan of your work. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you. All right, now that the pleasantries are out of the way, let's get down to business. I had 6 pages of questions for LaDonna all queued up. I never imagined that I would get through the whole thing. I figured she would just hang up the moment things got a little spicy. But she didn't. In fact, our call lasted 52 minutes. In today's episode, you're going to hear my conversation with LaDonna Humphrey. Hear what she has to say about some of these accusations made against her. And we're going to hear from some of her supporters. I'm Javier Leiva, and this is Pretend. Stories about real people pretending to be someone else. I think we should just start with the Melissa Witt stuff because it's a really interesting case. It's like the case that's defined your career, wouldn't you say?
I would think so, yeah. I joke with people that, I've done this almost a decade for her case, and sometimes even marriages don't last that long. So, it's been a long time,
You're a lot of things. You're an author, but you're also a documentarian, like we were just talking about. But you have a private investigator background. Like, tell me about your background.
So my background is in journalism. I was always interested in writing and reporting, thought that I was going to do that with my life, and then ended up going the nonprofit route. My actual day job is I'm a sober living director for women in recovery. And I've done that for about 6 years now.
Are you a private investigator too? I've heard that you are.
Yes, I was. I was for a couple of years. I did not renew my license last year. And I only ever used my license for the Witt case. I mean, I did some other things with, but that was the only cold case that I was involved in.
So let me ask you a question about the Witt case, because you got access to the case, just unprecedented access to the case, because it's still an open investigation, right?
It is. Yeah, it is.
And how were you able to get so much access to it? Like the diary and all that stuff.
When we first approached the chief at the time about doing the documentary on the Witt case, we didn't know that they would give us any access at all. We met with retired detectives, we met with the chief, we met with the current detective. And really kind of how that happened when I got full access is that when newspaper articles started running about my involvement in the case and the fact that I was going to be doing this documentary, a man contacted me in the middle of the night. He was crying. He asked me to take him to Melissa Witt's graveside. Anyway, when I went to one of the detectives with that information and gave him the name, they called me in and had to tell me that he was their prime suspect in the case. So I basically talked with this guy for about 7 years for them to get information for law enforcement. And because he wasn't going to talk to law enforcement, he had lawyered up. And so that's really how I got access. It was just a trust relationship that we built.
My only guess is that she's talking about Daniel Watson.
I mean, I've done a lot of criminal or reporting, on criminal cases that are active. And I mean, a lot of times it's just zip, nothing from the investigators. And a case could be considered open forever, right? Like until they don't ever have to solve the case, I guess. And those files tend to be locked down, right?
They do. And so, it's something I didn't take for granted. I mean, there's lots of things that I know about the case that I can't share with the public. And the books were read by law enforcement before I released them. And so there was approval there. And, it was just a trust relationship that we had. And so it's something that it was unique. And I'm proud of that relationship that we built. It's just really unusual. And there are a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do that with a case because you don't want certain information to get out. So I think it could be dangerous, but I think it's worked out pretty well with this relationship that I've had.
You also had access to the footage of the police discovering Melissa Witt's body. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And were you the one responsible for handing over that video to the media to post on YouTube?
No. What happened with that is, and I wrote about this in the back of my book, is that we put it on a private link for the current detective. It was viewed 5 times by law enforcement. It wasn't ever out there public, and we didn't hand it over to anybody else. And then there was a lady
But there was a YouTube video, right? It's been taken down, but the video was on YouTube. I've seen screenshots, right?
There was a private link for YouTube. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah.
But can you explain the reasoning for posting that video on YouTube?
We posted that on YouTube as a private link. So at the time, the detective, it was Troy Williams, could watch it quickly. And I think, like I said, I think it ended up having 4 or 5 views. It was just us and law enforcement. And then we took it off because we were able to get it in a DVD format for him and give it to him that way. Because the footage that they had was like on an older tape.
I gotcha. But I guess I don't understand. So they gave you access to the video. You posted it on YouTube so that they could see it? Is that what you're saying?
They gave me access to have it converted to a newer technology for them.
Ah,
that's what they gave us access for.
And you couldn't put it on Dropbox or Google Drive or anything like that?
I wasn't very tech savvy back then. Didn't know that you could do that. So that's why we did the YouTube link. I mean, we didn't know. I mean,
that was just kind of weird to me. That's why I asked
we wouldn't
you.
do it again.
How did you get access to something that sensitive? Right?
Like, we wouldn't do that again for sure. But it wasn't something that we gave to the public. But definitely wouldn't do it again. Dropbox for sure, or just not do it at all. And there was lots of footage that we had converted for law enforcement. It was something that they gave to us. We signed out for it and gave it back to them. So a little bit.
So like if I were to like reach out to law enforcement and ask them, this is how this went down, they would say, yeah, we allowed LaDonna to convert it to that's what they would say.
Yeah.
And as crazy as that sounds, she was right. That's exactly what Fort Smith PD told me. They allowed LaDonna and the video production company, which she refers to as her documentary team, to access Melissa Witt's case files and let her post it on a private link on YouTube. Unreal. We moved on to Charles Ray Vines, otherwise known as the River Valley Killer. LaDonna has said time and time again that Charles Ray Vines is not the killer. I wanted to know why LaDonna was so convinced he didn't do it.
What can you say about the accusations that you stole Missy Witt's diary from the evidence room from police? Was that something that they handed you, or that's something that you took for?
I've never had Melissa Witt's diary in my hands. I've only ever seen it at the Fort Smith PD.
Okay. And so you've said in your podcast, I listened to it this morning, that you've read it multiple times.
That's correct. Yes.
So does that mean that you've gone to the evidence room multiple times to read it?
I've never been in the evidence room, but I've been in the detective's office and in the conference room. I think I've read it maybe 4 times, maybe 5 times. They've had different people sit with me while I look through things or read it. But there was always a detective there. But I've never actually been in the evidence room in the Fort Smith Police Department.
So just to clarify, so every time you've read that, you said in your podcast, the one that I listened to today, that you probably read it like I want to say 30 times. I don't know if that's true or not over the years, right?
Yeah, a lot of times.
Yeah, a lot of times. So each time you've read it is because you've gone to the police department and they've shown it to you?
Yes, I've seen it numerous times when I've been at the police department. I mean, we've dug through the files together. I helped organize the files. I've spent a lot of hours at the Fort Smith Police Department.
I think it's really interesting because I was listening to an episode, and I forget which one it was of your latest podcast. I think it was like episode 11, where you kind of rule out Charles Ray Vines as a suspect. And I was curious, like, why you didn't go into what your reasonings were.
Sure. Obviously, I'm going to be sensitive with what I say on this. There's a lot of work that was done by the original lead detective, J.C. Ryder and Chris Boyd, on Vines. They spent a lot of time with him, and they do not believe he's a viable suspect. There's some background information to that with those interviews. I tend to agree with that as well. And I'm not really sure how much information I can give on that, but I'm convinced that he's not a viable suspect in the Witt case. Now, I guess somebody could prove all of us wrong. We've always said that. We've got somebody in mind. And if we're wrong, then we're wrong. I would definitely like to see the Witt case solved. It doesn't have to be who we think it is. If it ends up being Charles Ray Vines, then wow, I think we'll all be really, really shocked. But I'll be glad that the case is solved.
She has someone in mind? Could that be Daniel Watson? We'll get to that in a second.
I don't know if I heard this in a podcast or if I started reading it in a book, but you say that Charles Ray Vine wrote to you from prison. Is that
He did, yeah. We did write to each other before he passed away.
And what was like the tone of those letters?
The tone of the letters with me is, because I know he's written with other people, and I think he was a little bit more adversarial with other people. I think it depends on how you approach someone. The tone of his letters with me was more like, I found Jesus in prison. Everybody finds Jesus in prison, I think. His argument was that he had admitted to all of his crimes, and that if he'd killed Melissa, he would have come forward. Those type of things.
You think that if he would have killed Melissa, that he would have said so?
Yes. He was interviewed for, I think, almost 40, maybe 50 hours by J.C. Ryder. And there was a lot of talk about that case and other cases, because there's some other unsolved cases in the River Valley. J.C. just really felt like they got the truth out of him, and that he'd given a lot of information about the crimes he had committed. Now, with that said, do people who kill other people lie? Yes, they do. I mean, you could never know for sure. He was real open. Vines was real open with him about things at that point because he was caught, and his crimes were pretty horrific.
Yeah. Hey, and do you mind forwarding me copies of those letters just so I could see them myself?
I can give you a copy of a letter or two. Sure.
After our call, LaDonna sent me an epic email. In that email were several attachments, including an extreme close-up of a handwritten letter signed by Charles Vines. To my knowledge, I'm the first person to have ever seen LaDonna's Vines letters, or at least the tiny sliver of a corner. It's such a tight crop that I can barely make out the content of that letter. LaDonna has never posted these letters for anyone else to see. All we know is what's transcribed in her books. Look, I'm not a handwriting expert. In fact, handwriting forensic has been proven to be kind of junk science. But the letters that Patty Rush has from Charles Ray Vines and the ones that LaDonna have are wildly different handwriting. Unlike LaDonna, Patty provided me a full scan of the letter. In Patty's letter, the signature at the bottom says, "Thank you, Charles." In LaDonna's letter, it says, "Sincerely, Charles Vines," full name. And the dot above the letter I has a cute little bubble above it, almost like the Disney logo, So you mentioned that you have an idea that it's not Charles Ray Vine, but you have a suspect in mind. Is Daniel Watson one of those suspects? I mean, is he the one that you're thinking about? Do you think he's the one responsible for Melissa Witt's murder?
I'm not even sure how you have his name, but I'm not going to speak about Daniel Watson.
She didn't want to speak about Daniel Watson. Another acceptable answer would have been no, but she didn't deny it. After the break, we're going to get into some of the other controversies surrounding LaDonna Humphrey. By now, LaDonna Humphrey knows where this is going.
So that's the Melissa Witt stuff. And you alluded to maybe I know some things or whatever. I say, let's just talk about that. I've heard some things, mainly from Anthony Christopher. He made a lot of claims, and I would love to just talk to you about them, just kind of check them off. Because if it's something that we need to dismiss or whatever, and it's like a false accusation, I would love to just like knock those out. But like, how did you meet Anthony Christopher? I mean, if you don't mind me talking about it.
I can talk to you a little bit about it, but we currently have a legal case, and so I'm pretty limited on what I can say. I met him through a therapy clinic, a children's therapy clinic.
And I'm guessing you were terminated from that job. I guess it was Absolute Pediatrics where you were working with him.
That's what he says. That's what he says happened.
So you don't think you weren't terminated, or you quit, or?
I'm not allowed to discuss that. We currently have a legal case. So sorry. I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And no, I totally get that's a very reasonable answer. So one of the things that he told me, which sounded so far-fetched, but he says that you conducted a background check. He calls it an illegal background check on one of his psychologists. And you use that information to possibly extort him. What's your response to that?
That is not correct.
So you'd never conducted a background check?
That is not no, that is not correct. Anthony says a lot of things, but that's all I can say about Anthony Christopher.
Yeah. And let me know if you want to move on from this topic. If I could keep asking you questions about this or move on to something else. Are you cool with me asking?
I mean, I guess you need to do what you need to do. I mean, I was under the impression this was about the Witt case.
I could ask you more about the Witt case. I just want to do whatever you're comfortable with. If you feel like it's a legal thing, you can't talk about it, I could just ask you and then you answer if you can. If you can't, you can't, you know? So you were working for Absolute, and there was issues with the Medicaid stuff. And he says that you reported him, but you were the community outreach director. I guess my question is, why were you concerned about the Medicaid billing if that wasn't even your role? Or could you talk to me about that?
Yeah, if you look at the initials on Anthony Christopher's arrest warrant for the children that were in question, there's the initials of my children. But it's important to note that I wasn't the only one that turned Anthony in for Medicaid fraud. There were numerous other people.
I'm not sure who else reported Anthony about Medicaid fraud. Remember, when LaDonna was working at Absolute Pediatrics, Anthony's company was already undergoing an audit.
Ultimately, the Office of Medicaid Inspector General told me, they said, look, we don't believe that you've done anything wrong. We believe that this is a problem. You self-reported. We are not going to refer this over to the Attorney General's office for fraud because we don't feel like you did anything wrong.
If anything, LaDonna should have been more concerned about Anthony Christopher's speech pathologist, Jenna Hines, who was the one accused of billing irregularities. I spoke with Jenna Hines about this.
One thing that's on my mind, are you still a licensed speech language pathologist? Are you still working in that capacity?
Yes.
And so you're actively licensed right now?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Jenna Hines is a speech pathologist. Anthony had no idea when he hired her, but Jenna had disciplinary actions by the licensing board in the past.
Why? Because I'm researching Anthony's case and I'm just trying to put all the pieces together. I guess I'm wondering, one thing I don't know, and I'd rather hear from you than from him, is why was your license sanctioned?
Why was my license sanctioned?
When you were working in Springville, Arkansas?
Oh, you know what? It had something to do with me not understanding a billing process with.
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to understand this stuff. I guess what I want to ask you is, like, why were you not charged with the Attorney General if all the others were involved in the fraud?
Because I did not commit any fraud.
So
I was long gone from that company before LaDonna even got there.
So it's not true that you billed over 800 services that you didn't document? That's one of the allegations.
No, that's not true.
Okay. Is it true that you admitted to Anthony in a text that you indeed had not been documenting services with your clients and not requiring others to have documentation in place prior to your billing for these services?
No, what I was telling Anthony is that I did have it written down in various notebooks. I did not have it online. And I never told people it would be okay. I had documentation.
Is that protocol? I'm not familiar with the healthcare.
As long as you have a note, and I jotted it down in notebooks that I kept, and then I did transfer all those notes onto our EMR system.
I want to read to you some of the text messages that Jana Hines sent Anthony Christopher during this time period. She wrote, "I have never ever meant to be fraudulent. I have always tried to go above and beyond with my speech children and have always left the paperwork to the side to make sure that I have seen the children. I hope you know that whatever fines or anything that may come, I take full responsibility for. But if it comes down to documentation, I see why they are concerned. I am so sorry, Anthony." In another message, she wrote, "I am terrified and thinking the worst, like jail. By the way, you can totally say that you don't have a partnership with me. I don't want to bring the company down." In another message, she wrote, "I feel like a dirty criminal, actually worried about my sanity. I can't afford to have a nervous breakdown until the paperwork is finished. I'm not in a good place. Praying I don't have a complete meltdown. I haven't eaten since Monday."
And I guess, I'm just trying to understand everybody and their motivations, but what motivated you to implicate Anthony?
I did not implicate Anthony. I never reported him for fraud. You know what? I don't feel comfortable talking about anything anymore. I truly believe that I, for a fact, know that fraud was committed against my number, and I have the documentation to prove it.
I don't understand. The only reason I called Jana Hines was because after my interview with LaDonna, she specifically asked me to call certain people. Otherwise, she would not cooperate with my podcast series. Jana Hines was one of those people.
And right at that time, as we're being audited, LaDonna's hired. So LaDonna knows everything Jana's done. She knows everything that's happened that has caused us to have to self-report, to have to terminate her. And the moment LaDonna was fired, one of her first calls was to Jana. She then goes to Jana, tells Jana, we're trying to set her up. We're trying to get her arrested, that we're changing her documents, really crazy, outlandish things that were not true. Because I think she knew that she could manipulate Jana into trying to go after us because Jana was afraid of being in trouble because she had already dodged that bullet once.
Let's get back to my call with LaDonna.
He was alleging that you called DHS to report his clinic. Can you talk about that at all?
I mean, you should be able to pull any of that stuff out of court records on any reports that I made against Anthony Christopher. So probably I'm not going to get into the details about that.
I wanted to know more about the reported harassment. In the call with Bentonville Police Department, LaDonna admitted she sent spoof messages to Anthony's mother from an anonymous number. I wanted to get her take on it.
You forwarded messages to his mother. What were those messages about?
Gosh, this case started 6 years ago. I mean, he probably remembers that better than I do, but I did forward a message to his mom. I did.
And he said that you didn't use your own number to send the messages?
You'd have to look in court records for that.
The same person who wasn't tech savvy enough to know not to post sensitive case evidence on YouTube is the same person who just admitted to using a voice over IP number to disguise her identity.
When you were in the lawsuit, and I guess during discovery, they wanted to have access to your phone or something like that, and you reported your phone stolen, and that turned out...
My husband and I did, yeah.
Was that a real car break-in, or was that maybe a white lie that you told investigators?
It was a real car break-in, and there's also a police report, and I'm happy to give that to you. You should be able to get that pretty easily. The police investigated that, and the determination by law enforcement was that it was not a false report. So there is that. The judge didn't have that information, and my attorney didn't have that information from the detective to give it to the judge, and I served 10 days in jail for contempt of court.
So let's break this down. Remember, LaDonna and her husband, don't forget about her husband, report a car break-in the very same day Anthony's attorney filed a motion for expedited discovery. And I do have the police report. In that police report, it states that there was no evidence of theft, no sign of forced entry, and that LaDonna and her husband refused to have the officer look for fingerprints in the car.
So the number of the phone that was reportedly stolen was used after it was reported stolen. Is that true or not? That's what he's claiming.
That's what he's claiming. But if you look at the police report, when they investigated that claim, they said that's not accurate after they looked at the phone records. In fact, they said that Anthony and his attorney hadn't taken into consideration some sort of 6-hour time difference. I mean, I don't know all the technicalities, but you could read the report for sure.
The court was looking at UTC time. UTC stands for Coordinated Universal Time. UTC is like the world's master clock that everyone uses to make sure that we all know what time it is, no matter where you are. So I don't know what she's talking about.
And again, that wasn't taken into consideration by the judge. But there is a police report where a detective came in and said, he interviewed us, he interviewed my husband, he investigated it, he looked at the phone reports, and he's all of it based on Anthony's claims. And they determined that my phone had been stolen.
She just said that law enforcement proved that it was not a false report because the detective from Bentonville Police Department reviewed the phone records and determined that there was no outgoing usage after the police report was filed. But when the court called an expert witness who specializes in digital forensics to analyze the phone logs, he noticed that the old SIM card was inserted back into the phone and was captured by the AT&T network. Maybe LaDonna was trying to dump contacts or data off her phone. Who knows? So when LaDonna points to this low-res screenshot of a supplementary report from a detective, which doesn't look like any official police document, and I don't know where it came from, it doesn't discount the evidence found in the courtroom. Maybe LaDonna didn't make the call, but that stolen SIM card somehow made its way back to the new phone. Your little blurry screenshot did not exonerate you like you're telling everyone on social media. And let's talk about this contempt of court point that she made. Yes, she served 10 days for contempt of court. She claims that she got jail time because she did not turn over her phone or documents during discovery. And that's partly true, but let's get specific. I'll read to you the court contempt rulings so that there's no confusion. The court entered its order on August 14, 2019, finding that the defendant violated the order in 5 separate instances. First, the defendant's phone was not stolen. Second, the defendant destroyed evidence. Third, the defendant sent spoof emails. Fourth, the defendant falsely claimed on her Facebook and Gmail accounts that she had been hacked. Fifth, the defendant falsely claimed that her Apple account had been deleted by a thief or a hacker. The court finds the defendant, LaDonna Humphrey, in contempt of court and shall serve 2 days for each of the 5 violations said above. So there you have it. Next time on Pretend, you're going to hear the rest of my conversation with LaDonna Humphrey. We're going to talk about Fetish Master, Alicia Lockhart, and all kinds of stuff. That's next time on Pretend.
creative back